driving digital engagement, whether self-service or self-led. My name is Marissa Mueller, and I'm the Digital Marketing Manager here at Corporate Visions. Before we get started, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping items so that we can make today's event with Tim and Ardath as interactive as possible. As you've heard by now, you have joined the presentation muted, and you'll remain muted for the duration of the webinar. However, you will have the opportunity to use both your chat and Q&A box throughout the presentation. To find the chat and Q&A box, simply hover at the bottom of your screen and you'll see your Q&A and chat options. Submit any questions you have using the Q&A box, and then you can use the chat box to answer any questions the panelists may ask you. Be sure to select the blue bar that says all panelists and attendees so that others can see what you have to say as well. Feel free to send in your questions at any time during the event. Tim and Ardath will be answering questions throughout the presentation. And just as a reminder, following the event, we will be sending all attendees a recording of the webinar along with the slides within the next 24 hours. So keep an eye out for that. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Here to kick off the content and introduce our special guest is Tim Riesterer, Chief Strategy Officer for Corporate Visions and author of the just released book, The Expansion Sale. Over to you, Tim.
All right, thanks, Marissa. Hey, everybody. This is a good day because I get to be with my friend Ardath. We've spent a lot of time back in the day when we went to live events on the same stage, content marketing world, marketing profs, things like that. And so it's good to rejoin her here in this virtual setting. We are going to be, speaking of which, virtually presenting on a track on content marketing world coming up on a track that Ardath is leading. So I'm excited about that as well. But Ardath, good to see you. Thanks for being here. Oh, I still have you on mute, Ardath.
Well, of course, that would help, huh? Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, this is
in person.
Yeah, no, I know this is sad, but happy. Here we are. Hey, everybody, enough about us. The words I want you to see that Ardath and I are going to kind of focus on today are driving digital engagement. And we spent a lot of time examining what it takes. I mean, Ardath's company's called Marketing Interactions. So I think it's right there in her title. But this is a piece of data you've probably seen. If you haven't seen it, it comes from Gartner. But this is kind of the reason I think we're all here. It's this number right here, that 80% of the buying journey, so all the contact that a potential buyer of you is having, they believe is happening in a self-service sort of mode. And they kind of like it that way. And self-service, digital, that's a lot of digital. That's a lot of digital touches. And I'm assuming you're here today because you own those touches. It means that some of the traditional touches, and I think this was true, I know this was true even before we all went virtual, were dwindling in terms of actual sales touches in the buying journey. In fact, I like to say that if there's 3 vendors involved in the deal, you get about 5% of your customers' time in a direct sales with their lips moving sort of conversation. So we're here because it's a digital engagement sort of world right now. And so with that stat in mind, I want to also posit this with you. Now everything's digital. It's not just 80%. In fact, your sellers who used to be in front of the room with their lips moving are now, just like Ardath and I, about the size of a postage stamp in the corner of your screen. And there's all kinds of digital content that you're going to see. So if you in your company own the creation of digital messages and digital content and in an effort to create direct digital engagement or even digital support for sales conversations, you're in the right place today. So one of the things that I want to talk about, and I'll get Ardath's opinion on this, is like, so what's the big challenge now that we're in a digital environment further down the funnel? So it's not like we haven't been in a digital environment. You guys have been doing a lot of this, but it's going further down the funnel. So the thing that's really big here is this idea that decisions are more impacted further down the funnel with digital only self-service touches. So if we imagine a digital touch happening at some point along the spectrum, and we'll call this point EA, there's a decision made somewhere here, point B. And the thing about digital content is that you want to be precisely remembered. So remember those words, precise or precision memory. You want to be precisely remembered when this thing gets to point B. But you're battling an enemy that is even greater in the digital environment, and that is memory decay. Between the time that they go from point A to point B, they forget way more than they remember. And sort of the enemy is that they will either remember something random. They don't remember exactly the thing you want them to remember. They remember random things that aren't important to the decision. So you want to avoid random memory. The other kind of memory you want to avoid is gist. Somebody gets the gist of it. Well, if they only remember the gist of what you had to say, the problem is in most of your markets, you probably sound like and say a lot of the same things as everybody else in your market. And frankly, lots of times even adjacent markets. And so your buyers will get the gist, but that's not good news for you because they won't necessarily ascribe that to you and the decision-making process. So because memory decay is the big issue in the digital touches, and your goal is to be remembered, you want to target precision memory. That means they remember precisely, and what makes you different and unique precisely. And so we're going to talk a lot about how memorable is your content, how memorable are your messages moving from point A to point B, and what kind of digital experiences and interactions you need to create to embed that, that precise memory. So before I jump into some survey work we just did with people like you and Ardath, any feedback, comments, or thoughts on this idea that it's memory that drives a decision, and the digital environment, as prolific as it is one fraught with memory leaks?
Yeah, well, what comes to mind for me is relevance, of course. I wrote a book about it, but it's even more important for us to understand and know our audiences, because how do you expect to be precise with something they'll remember if you don't know them well enough? But the other thing too is this is really a call to action for marketers reaching all the way across the funnel with content, providing ear support to their sales teams and whatever else. But it's even harder to engage people. And I think, it's interesting because, Tim, I know you've seen that the stats going up, like when COVID started happening, we're working remotely, email involvement went up, digital content engagement went up, people are looking at more stuff, but they're flitting around and multitasking. And it's even harder to keep their attention, right? And so, and for the most part, when you're online looking at content, it's a passive experience. So, it takes a lot to be remembered these days.
Yeah, I think those are awesome comments. If memory decay is the problem, you need to know what's causing it. So passive content, and you're going to hear a lot about how to make your content not passive. Relevant content, you're going to learn a lot about today about relevance. And the idea that this is an attention-starved environment, an attention competitive environment, that the competition in this environment isn't just your competitors, it's all the other avenues, outlets, channels, and content that they're exposed to. It is overwhelming and crazy. And having a target of precision memory, being the one they remember, and avoiding memory decay at point B is a battle. And that's what we want to talk about today. So we did some research and asked how you think you're doing. So number one, I guess the good news is I didn't tell you anything you didn't know. 91% of you said you believe it's really important that people remember you. But what's interesting is, give or take, if you kind of use 3 as the middle, you're not that confident if your stuff is memorable and or shareable or being acted on. So that memory is a big deal. That memory is key, and yet you fret that you're doing it well enough. So I hope that's why you're here today. We had a pretty good turnout for sure. So you're in good company. Everybody sort of feels this way right now in the market. So what are we going to do about it? So one thing you need to know that I think is unique is some of the things you're going to hear today is that we at Corporate Visions actually run a brain lab, a neuroscience lab. Our chief science officer, Dr. Carmen Simon, runs a lab where we do actual experiments on people who match the B2B profiles of the people you're trying to reach, and do this with all kinds of different techniques. When they come into the lab and study your website, your videos, your content, your presentations, they put on these helmets, EEG caps with electrodes. They have electrodes on their heart, ECG, the eye tracking devices, as well as galvanic skin response. So we're looking at exactly how people are remembering and emotionally engaged and motivated to do something with what they're seeing and hopefully engaging with. So what are we exactly measuring? People much smarter than I are measuring this and doing the data analysis, Ardath. I'm not going to pretend here that that I'm the cognitive neuroscientist, but I do know what we're looking at. One is attention. I told you it's an attention competitive environment. So we're trying to figure out where they pay attention, how they pay attention, how much attention they pay, and how can you improve that? How can you amp that up? We're looking at cognitive load. Sometimes you want a little more cognitive load because they're processing, which means they're engaging. And sometimes you have to ease it because if there's too much, you won't even remember anything because it just overwhelms people. We're looking at engagement. Are they engaging? Are the parts of the brain involved in engagement lighting up? Motivation. Are they willing to take actions? The great thing about these brain labs is instead of asking them, would you be willing to download or what's the likelihood of, we actually can put those buttons in front of them to take the next step and see if they go to push it. And so we're actually looking at actions being taken. We want to know if they're feeling good about it. Are they feeling good? And we don't want them to feel drowsy. I think one of the things that are funny about our experiments is to get a baseline in terms of how people feel about your content. We first have them inside of the gear stare at a beige wall for like 2 minutes. That gives us the baseline that you don't want to dip below. And we can literally see, we'll have companies, corporate presentations, investor decks, and other things, and watching as subject people, like their brains dip below beige wall. You don't want to go below beige wall. So that's how we help you figure out how to do that. You want them to be excited, feeling pleasant about it, the experience, and paying attention, engaged, and motivated. So this presentation today is sort of a prelude to some other stuff that we're going to be bringing out in about and around November. So I just wanted to give it, this is sort of your teaser. We're going to let you know that we are currently in the lab studying 3 major content items that you might be curious about. Because again, it's about digital engagement. It's about being interactive. It's about getting people to see it as relevant and worthy of acting on. We're studying your brain on content visuals. Specifically, we're trying to understand what people see as cliche and what they see as authentic. And then we want to see how they react to what mix of these. So unfortunately, a lot of people's stock photography libraries that your brand library allows fall into this camp right here. And we know from previous studies that people don't respond as well to cliche images as they do to things that are more unexpected and cause them to engage, right? Pay attention versus just dismiss because they've seen the smiling person in front of the computer screen before. But we're doing some more intense so that we can give you more specific recommendations on how to handle your visuals. We're looking at presentations, like you're experiencing a presentation right now. In a virtual setting like this, we're testing static because our company works with 215 B2B companies every year. So we look at a lot of PowerPoint presentations, and most every one of them, the slides come up, the bullets come up, the pictures come up, and there's nothing interesting, nothing moving. And the problem in a virtual environment, it's fine in a room when a salesperson is razzle-dazzling, but in a virtual environment like this, you need like 3 to 5 times the amount of motion to keep people engaged. whether that motion is driven by animation on the slides, as you'll see some of that today, or the cool stuff that I'm doing with my pen today, annotation. We're testing that, and we want to show where, how much, and what works the best. Again, it's all about digital engagement. And the final study we're doing, and I embrace, encourage, and ask you to embrace our email stream. Keep an eye on this. We're going to be promoting these findings, probably give or take around early November. We're testing a passive infographic against an interactive assessment. And basically, it's the same exact information and insight being provided, except one's in an infographic passively presented, and one is sort of self-discovered in an interactive assessment where you're being asked information, given a nugget of information, ask a question, and then your results direct you to another question and some findings. The reality is both will give you the same insights at the end. It's just a different path to get there. And we're really trying to understand through all the brain study stuff I just talked about, what content will create better digital engagement deeper in the buying journey. So that's this kind of stuff we're working on, but the stuff we've already discovered. And this is going to be the agenda for the rest of our time together today. And Ardath and I are going to trade off here. The stuff we've already discovered, there's 4 main reasons that your content is forgettable. And some of these Ardath has already alluded to. Like this ice cream, their memories will melt. And that the message lacks appropriate context. Ardath talked about the importance of context. It's static and irrelevant. She mentioned passive and not relevant, right? So the messages aren't in context. They lack, they're not engaging, and they're irrelevant, and they don't drive action. The offers don't compel people to take action. And finally, your value story gets lost in the crowd, and memory has decayed, and you're just a big goop of just memory at best. So we want to tackle all 4 of these. Ardath, I'm going to stop for a second here. Any of the brain science or these 4 that you want to highlight before we dive into each one?
Well, I'm having a little bit of a conundrum about the beige wall thing, and God forbid your content is the equivalent of the beige wall, you know. And then I figure my graphic design budget has now needs to be expanded, given that we're going to need to have authentic graphics.
Yeah, authentic, unexpected, yeah.
And I'm looking forward to the passive versus interactive study you're doing, because I know what I expect to see, and I'm sure we're going to see interactive, take over, but it'll be interesting to learn why.
Exactly.
And what
and
type
how.
of interactive.
Yes, exactly. What type and how. That's well put. Exactly what we're going to be looking for, because you and I are going to show a couple interactive tools today that are already we're working on with our clients and in market with. So we know interactive does some things because it offers ability to track exactly what they're doing and give them a different kind of choose your journey dynamic. So we know those sound good on paper. I'm going to be really honest. It's going to be exciting to see how much better, different, and exactly where and how people really do process and engage that. So good. So let's talk about messages lacking appropriate context. The problem with context is essentially, or the opposite or the antithesis is what we call situational fluency. Your messages and content need to be situationally fluent. And I'm going to drive this one a little bit. We've done unique studies here at Corporate Visions and have been able to determine, if you've seen any of our work before, that not all conversations are created equal. That in fact, the acquisition conversation and that funnel is distinctly different from the client expansion conversation and that funnel. And that if you want to be contextually relevant, you need to treat prospects differently than customers. That might sound obvious, but the question becomes exactly how and why. What we have really tapped into is this idea of the science that we don't call, the scientists call, our cognitive neuroscientists call status quo bias. This is this tendency of humans to stick with their status quo. And basically, you've maybe heard these questions before, but have you interrogated your content to realize that when you're in client acquisition, you're going after net new business, are you disrupting and defeating status quo bias because there's an incumbent you must dislodge and you must answer certain questions for? But do you realize then that one size doesn't fit all? That existing customers are actually asking a different question. They have a different mindset. You have to defeat status quo bias when you are not the status quo bias, but you want to protect, build a firewall, defend, reinforce, put a moat around status quo bias when you are the status quo bias. So in fact, your message to be contextually relevant, sorry, I didn't mean 180%, 180 degrees different. And there's content that we're going to offer here at the end that will help you dig deeper into this. But the truth of the matter is that the first thing you need to do to not be forgettable is to not forget who you're talking to. And if you're talking to a prospect where you must defeat status quo and dislodge an incumbent, you must talk in terms that cause them to say they need to change and they need to do it now. But when you're talking to an existing customer, you want to reinforce, defend, and build on status quo bias and their preferences for you, and the messages change. It acknowledges what they've done and the impact that you've done for them, the mutual investment and effort you've both made before you talk about your new thing and what you'd like them to do next or ask them to renew. So the first step in making sure your digital engagement is more memorable is to be cognizant of and then explicit about the way your messaging and content addresses the situation or status quo scenario. Is it a prospect where you're dislodging the incumbent, or is it a customer where you want to leverage your incumbent advantage? And there's a different tone and manner to that. Ardath, let me toss it to you because I know you've had some thoughts about buyer's journey across life cycles and things like that.
Well, yeah, exactly. And the thing I want to start with is research that I think you guys did a while ago that found 58% of companies use the same content to engage buyers and customers. And it just doesn't work that way, as you talked about the difference in status quo bias. And so in a lot of the work that I do, I'm creating buyer personas for net new business, but I'm also creating customer personas for upsell, cross-sell, account expansion, et cetera, those kinds of things, because their status quo is different. They solve that problem that you're talking to your net new buyers about. So it has to be different content, and it has to be about how do they get even more value, than what you promised them originally, right? So why stay, why evolve, exactly. So it's a different conversation. And I think even more interesting than that is, given the amount of dramatic change we've had this year, even the personas that you have, if you created them before March, they're going to be different right now. So I think it's really important that we keep up with how things are changing with our buyers and what's different, because in the past, there was always a need to want to know about ROI. Now they're scrutinizing it heavily. CFOs are sitting in on calls and they never used to show up. Well, do your sales reps know how to have that conversation? And do you have information for the CFO, or is that something your sales reps always provided somehow? So there's a different need for different kinds of content based on how things have changed.
Yeah, and entirely true. And I think we don't want to create something unscalable here, but we do want to help you understand the psychology of this, because at some point this is rooted in the fact that there's a psychological, sorry, I need to build it, and now I need to erase a different psychology at work here. When you go back to the neuroscience that we talked about, the psychology of being someone who is doing something with someone else is that I've done this and I prefer to keep my current preference stable. So your job is to destabilize their preferences because they're natural tendencies to do that. So the psychology is, how do I overcome status quo bias, which is you have to introduce uncertainty with their status quo before they're ever going to even consider to move. On the other side, somebody wrote, does this address confirmation bias? validation for your own beliefs. Great question, Jeffrey. Yes, that's what we're leaning into is status quo bias is also confirmation bias. You made a decision. You want affirmation, confirmation that that was the right decision. And so the problem is if you go out with a new product launch message and content asset, and it's disruptive and challenging and it's very provocative and it's all new. If you send that message to an existing customer, what the research has showed us is that they go, whoa, geez, if I've got to potentially change that much, then I might as well look at everybody to make sure I've got the right partner because there's going to be a lot of change involved anyways. And so the idea is confirmation bias or reinforcement of status quo bias says, remind them of the impact, the mutual investment, and the progress they've made to date, and how this is an extension of that, which makes that an easier decision than if you just come in like a provocative sale to an existing customer, and you sound just like all your competitors who have the same provocative sale, and they go, guess we need to take a look at this because I didn't want to change, but it looks like a lot of change. So I hope you guys see what I'm saying. The difference is there. It is very psychological. So your stories have to change. And your skills in telling those stories and building the right pieces have to change. Ardath, I don't know, have you done any research on, we're talking here a lot about visual learning and things like that. Catherine asked about kinesthetic and auditory people. I have a very strong opinion about that, but I don't know, Ardath, have you done much research on those things to see how different, let's say, learning styles are affected by messaging and content?
Not a whole lot. I've done some in working with Modus about sales training and microlearning, which we're going to talk about later.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what I would say is what you're going to hear from both of us, I think, is everybody's a visual learner. Will you enhance learning if there's a little bit of kinesthetic and auditory? Like if you have a video that plays, or if you have the ability to interact with it and choose your journey. Yeah, I could argue, hey, you gave them something kinesthetic, you gave them something that they heard and saw. But at the end of the day, most people learn, remember, and decide visually. Because the number one tool people use to decide is contrast between what they're doing and what you're offering. And contrast is a highly visual thing. They try to decide between the current state and the future state. Is there enough contrast for me to think there's value in taking that risk and making that move? So I would just share that as sort of an answer to that question. All right, great questions coming in, but we must press on. So situational fluency, the idea is there's a difference between acquisition and expansion, and you need to reflect that in terms of defeating, disrupting, or reinforcing and expanding. So the second one is this idea of, is the content static and irrelevant? And what's the opposite of that is creating a little bit of dynamic interaction, that it causes people to have to pay attention in order to accomplish something versus passively just try to ingest along with all the noise around them. That's the premise here. So if we dive into that, I'm going to show you an example of an interactive asset that we've created, and I'm also going to turn it over to Ardath to share one of the cooler things that I've seen recently in terms of interaction, especially in the era of pandemic, is that there's psychology that says self-serve, self-discovery, and then ultimately self-persuasion are the most effective forms of persuading people to make a decision. Self-persuasion is more effective than you persuading. And you want to get people in the mode where they're trying something on and transferring ownership to them, not you as the authority. They become the authority as they choose the journey and persuade themselves all the way along. We believe every click, every question they answer, and every new thing they discover is compiling psychologically a series of self-discovery, self-persuasion sorts of things. And we've got an interactive ebook as one example. And I'm going to take you there now for a second and just kind of drive you through it. So the power of an interactive ebook is, again, it allows you to do so many things in here. And this one doesn't even do everything that you possibly could. You'll see more of that from Ardath, but you can choose your journey up here. We just talked about acquisition versus expansion. You can learn a little bit about the difference between the two, or you can engage in a visual and drill deeper into elements of the visual. I taught you a little bit about status quo bias, but maybe you want to learn more. You want to go a little bit deeper and understand there's 4 reasons people don't change their mind. And let me take a look at what each one of these means and how I can respond to it. So you're creating an interactive environment, asking them questions. When they answer, you tell them how they compare to other people like them. One of the things that's very important is to stoke people's natural tendency to be voyeurs. And you just give the power to them to pick, like I said, and choose their journey. Hey, one of the things with my existing customers I want to focus on is how to upsell. So I'm going to drill into that first. Oh, there's a framework, and I can click on and learn and understand and go deeper to understand what that framework is and how it works. I can participate in a survey and submit my answer and see how I compare to the other survey respondents. So Ardath, a powerful sort of spin on ebooks or infographics is considering how to make them interactive, choose your journey, self-discovery, self-persuasion. And as they go through here, more and more, they will build that sense of like it starts to snowball for them. And it builds progressively versus here it all is. And now I got to sort of sift through it. And what's powerful about it is this idea that you can track key metrics like consumption, what they're consuming. So they consume this ebook. Now you have an opportunity to have an SDR or a salesperson talk to them. You can know not only did they download the ebook, you know what time they spent and where they spent that time. Imagine the intelligence. So not only is it a good digital engagement, think of the engagement that your SDR or salesperson is going to have when they have this data available to them. Not only are they interested in the concepts around the expansion sale, they zoomed in on upsells and spent the predominant amount of their time there. And they checked the box that said they were not confident. Remember, there was a survey there. So powerful engagement on multiple levels that really goes a next step in terms of creating relevance because they're choosing the journey and it's not static or passive. It's entertaining, engaging, and dynamic. Thoughts there before we go to your example?
Well, yeah, and I would take the metrics a little bit further. So for me as a marketer, it would be about how do the metrics inform my content strategy, right? How can I tell from what the most interest was shown in? Do we need to add more content to that section? Do we need to change this other section to make it more relevant? What's hitting really well and what's missing, and can we then create triggers, so that you could alert your sales rep and say, hey, so-and-so is interested in upsells and, here's where they engage. How can we really connect the dots? Because quite frankly, if the future is about digital experience and digital experience lasts for the majority of the buying process, we have to figure out how to seamlessly connect all of that. So buyers are saying, salespeople need to continue the messaging and content that marketing started or whatever they started with, right? So that everything is seamless and it transitions smoothly instead of buyers stepping in and saying, so tell me about your company. What are you interested in?
Yeah, it's like they started over and the customer's like, wait a minute, I had a very interactive experience with you guys. Yeah, awesome points. I'm seeing a lot of questions come up, and one thing Ardath and I will promise is we're going to Google Doc anything we don't get to today, and we will answer them because there's a couple questions about the acquisition versus expansion earlier, and I do want to answer those for you. So in the follow-up, you will get a recording. You will get some other content that we'll show you at the end, free from both Ardath and I. You will get the slides and you will get our answers to your questions in a Google Doc. So keep them coming. Don't be discouraged if we can't get to them. And
if you're coming to Content Marketing World, the session I'm doing with Tim, that Tim does masterfully, is about the expansion sale. So
yeah, I probably answer. We have more time dedicated to that, so I probably answer those questions there. Mm-hmm. All right, so we're talking about the power of dynamic interaction, and one of the things I saw you doing these days, Ardath, is this visual right here. Isn't just a visual. Talk to us about this idea of creating experiences in digital virtual engagements.
Yeah, so this is an example of a company I work for, Modus, that took several different tools they had and put them together once COVID hit. And they provide a sales hub, a sales enablement platform. And once field sellers could no longer be in the field and marketers couldn't exhibit at trade shows, we started combining some of the technology. And you can see this, Tim spinning it around in a 360. And this is an example of a trade show booth that is 360. You can have a content hotspots wherever you want. You can have videos that play and white papers, other kinds of downloads. You can do lead capture. When this is live, you actually have a live chat with your sales reps in the booth. You can live stream. So you can integrate with Zoom. So you could have Zoom room meetings. You can do a variety of different things. But the other thing that I'd like for you to think about is when you look at this booth, this is built with a bunch of graphics, right? 3D graphics. Well, you could build anything you want and have this right on your website and be an always on demand generation experience. So you could have an area, for example, in B2B, we have buying committees. So let's say you have 3 or 4 different personas you have to engage. You could have different areas focused on each one of them. You could have different areas focused on each stage of the journey, right? Where you could get the analytics and insights for who's engaging where, so you know where they are in the journey. So you can turn it into anything you want. In this case, our clients are using it for trade shows because everybody's doing virtual trade show now. Right? So content marketing is virtual this year, and so is marketing profs, and so are we today. But it's a new way to engage, and it beats the heck out of that passive, flat booth that a lot of exhibitors are getting now, where they can put up a couple of PDFs and maybe open a chat window. So
yeah, when you and it's always on. That's the thing, Ardath, is like it used to have to wait till the trade show in November, and shoot, that's the end of your year. I mean, now you can create virtual digital engagement year round. That's what blew me away with this. And if you wanted to, like you said, you could put live chat on here and have people manning this thing. And it's different than a flat website too. I've seen you do this with like product demo, like you can cross-section it, you can dig into it, and you literally can create a digital self-service product demo that allows them to choose their journey, self-directed, go deeper where they want to go deeper, back out of it, share it around. That is amazing.
Yeah, so think of somebody that sells massively big equipment, like a huge excavator machine that Caterpillar sells, for example, and they use virtual product tours. So because they can't always take the machine into the field. And so their reps can actually show the buyer what it looks like to sit in the seat and look out the windshield, what the view looks like. They can drill down into other parts of it and see how certain things work. And so you can do all kinds of things with this kind of technology. And it's really fun to see, what customers are doing with it. So yeah.
Somebody did ask about buying committees, and you quickly, it was a glancing blow, but you said something about buying committees. How do we address committee buying? Trying to reach consensus complicates consumption with personalities and other variables. And I think you kind of answered that here. You could segment this thing, right?
Well, you could. And here's the key thing I think it's important to remember. Buying committees are growing, even more so since the pandemic has happened. But we need to look at how you get a persona to pass along information to another one. So for example, if you had this kind of an experience and you could say, share this with Jim, and shoot something over to Jim or invite him to come into the experience, to see something. But the other thing is, the more information that you can share with the number of personas within that committee means they're not going to be gathering information from other alternatives or competitors and bringing it back. And then what happens is they have to deconflict all that information because nobody talks about it the same, or they all talk about it the same. You're trying to figure out, okay, so what's different? So the more engagement you can create across that buying committee through pass along or inviting others into an experience, allowing them to do it, the better off you are.
But I could see the power. Like if you have I want to go back to this. If you have somebody who's a certain decider, so decider number 1 and decider number 2, I'll just finish the analogy, decider 3 and 4, if their sections are included here, but it brings them back to a common place, the key thing about buying committees is you've got to drive consensus. Consensus is the big deal. And if you just start creating a whole raft, so now you've got, okay, here's all my content assets for this person, and I've got a whole bunch of other content assets for this person, and you get the drift, but I do like my colors. So content assets for this person, but you've got your green and your blue and your purple, but they all got to come together for a red decision. I think what's powerful about this is it can kind of, once it's all in one place, they can see themselves coming together because it's here and it's in a similar space, but they've got each of their own angles on it, but yet it's drawing them into a consensus. It's still all about this particular vendor, and it's about solving this problem the way they solve the problem. So I like this idea a lot. I think it's clever. You guys are onto something there. So that's dynamic interaction, the idea of making your content assets interactive, but also creating dynamic interactive online experiences. I forgot Ardath and I are both working with the same plumbing fixture company whose sales reps can't go make calls like they used to. And they used to hand over these fixtures and show you just like how much better this copper fitting is, or this gasket is, or whatever it is. And it was very tactile. And now they're like, we got no more tactile. So how are we going to replicate that experience? Well, the salespeople are like, I don't know. So now marketing to the rescue, you got to build something like this. And so if all these digital interactions are going further downstream, solutions like the ones you're seeing here, I think are going to make a lot of sense. Number 3, offers don't drive action. The opposite of that is creating more purposeful engagement. And so Ardath has got a couple things to share here and a couple big ideas that I really like. And so maybe take them through this one, because it's about action, right? It's about driving action. Really is not just I raised my hand. Driving action is I'm willing to talk to somebody. Eventually, I want to talk to somebody in your company about doing something different and doing something next. So you guys are creating some very cool digital engagement experiences, again, that help with that.
Yeah, so this is what we call a digital sales room or a customer microsite. And you can even extend it to think about if they were in that virtual booth that we were looking at before, and they clicked on some different content and we packaged it up and sent it all to them when they left, and they got it like this. And then what happens here is, here's the content that they selected. There's a discussion thread here they can participate in. You can see they can invite their colleagues to also come here, right? Just like they did in the booth, perhaps. And there's also a contact me tab for when they're ready to engage the sales rep. And so this kind of contains all of the assets, right, for a record of engagement, if you will. And so as things move on, the sales rep could add more content. If they ask a question in the chat or they actually have a call, you can schedule a Zoom meeting from here. But the idea of it is they could also submit things here. So if they have a requirements document or they have something they want you to look at and consider in how you're talking about how your solution will work for them, they can submit content here. If somebody new gets added to the buying group, they can catch up. They can look at the thread. They can look at the content. No longer do people have to go dig through their emails trying to figure out how to forward everything on. And so you have a record of the engagement, but then also think about this idea that once they become a customer, you could add another tab to this perhaps and onboard them and put microlearning or training in here so that you can help them make that transition. And then let's say you lose your champion somewhere along the way and a new person comes on board and they have to be reoriented. Here you go. Here's everything you need to know. But the thing about it is that it's active. Anytime somebody views a piece of content or posts a comment in the thread, everybody that belongs to this microsite gets alerted, the sales rep, the buyers, everybody else, so that they can respond in close to real time. And so it's, kind of a living, breathing thing that helps you develop that relationship over time. and I find it kind of fascinating actually as a way to just keep everybody together and establish that interaction in a way that's not really intrusive. Remember at the beginning, Tim said, self-serve versus sales led. Well, your buyers like to do a lot of their research on their own. Well, here you go. And yet they can still leave a comment, ask a question, and the rep will be notified and respond, on the buyer's terms whenever they're ready for it, instead of the rep chasing them around saying you got 15 minutes.
Yeah, and those people who are coordinating the buying committee and you're one of the vendors, let's say, they do their work, they put it into this spot, and they always have this place to go back to. It's amazing to think about. Again, if marketing, I'm assuming most people here are marketing and not individual sellers, but people who have to facilitate these digital engagements further down the funnel. I used to work at old time days at an agency, and the head of Marcom, every answer to every question was another brochure. We got to do this in the market. We need a brochure. We need a brochure, brochure. And the idea that we were just going to advance all these sales cycles by having different brochures that match the different stages of the journey. It's a whole new world now where the different stages of the journey are different engagements with different things, but the ability to coalesce that, to collect that in a place and create a meeting spot, personalized customer microsites that are the customers, but also gives them a chance and the salespeople a chance to connect. And it feels like, I think of it like the electronic medical record. If I go to my primary doctor and then I got to do a specialist and then I got to go to somebody who does something else, I want them all looking at the same record. I don't want to start all over. Don't want to tell them the same things. I don't want them to miss something that somebody else saw. Or I want the next person to be able to see the same thing and get kind of a second opinion, right? I mean, there's just a power to this idea of the ultimate customer record, and not the one that's in your CRM that tells you how to sell to them, but the ultimate customer record that helps them figure out how to make a decision. So that's what this is. I think it's very cool.
Yeah, and the one other thing that I should mention is that these are all spun up automatically. So whether we're spinning up as marketing, following up with somebody who visited the trade show, or the sales rep has a meeting and decides to send content that was discussed in the meeting as follow-on, this microsite spins up itself automatically. So they don't have to go ask anybody to build one for them. They can easily maintain it and add content to it, revisit it, whatever, when they need to. And it also holds all kinds of different content, from videos to infographics to PDFs to whatever. Yeah. So you could put recordings of your meetings in there, for example, so that everybody can keep up,
Yep, because we're all doing that nowadays, staring at ourselves and recording ourselves. This is awesome. I'm going to press this on just looking at time because these are all super kind of sexy, but I like this one too. This is, I'm calling this decision enablement. This actually, again, the whole idea of getting someone to take action we're forgettable because we don't get people to take action because it's just all passive. And the idea of some of these, this is not new to have tools and calculators, but sometimes these things were built and given to salespeople. And again, in the world of digital engagement, maybe these things have to be owned by the digital teams creating the engagement deeper in the cycle. So why don't you talk about some of these types of enablement, decision enablement, buyer enablement tools?
Right. Well, this is another example of engaging somebody interactively. So let's say that you're having a meeting with a buyer and you pull this up and the two of you work through it together, the sales rep and the buyer, and they get to participate and figure out what's the impact for them? What does the value look like to them? And they're building it. They're providing the numbers that go in it. So it's not like the sales rep is throwing out some figures from a company that doesn't relate to them. So, it helps them actually own the outcome and get invested in, how do I get that value that you're showing me? So you can do this in a number of ways. You can create value assessments. You can create ROI calculators. You can create total cost of ownership assessments, different things so that people can look at value however they want. Now, one of the things that came up in some recent research is the growing importance of proving ROI. Now that we've gone to virtual selling, cash flows are tight, whatever's going on right now, having something like this can help you cross that line, but it also helps you prove to your buyers that you're listening to them, right? Because you're showing them something they care about. They're putting the numbers in, you're working on it together, and listening is something else that buyers are saying we need to do better at.
Yeah, and co-creating. So now there's skin in the game. I think whenever there's skin in the game, that advances this moment too. So not necessarily something new, but a lot of times it was kind of the domain of sales. But now I think it can be part of the self-service digital engagement. And that thing we're testing, the passive infographic versus the interactive assessment, is going to be something like this. So it's not an ROI calculator, but it's like, think of it like a assess yourself for like a maturity model. Where do you land on this thing? And so again, instead of passively ingesting it, actually answering assessment type questions and getting insight and feedback as you do it, will that create more of that action? Like, will they be more willing to take an action after this versus just passively engaging? So again, awesome stuff. Looking at the time here, you and I are usually, we're excellent talkers. I think that's the problem. So I saw another good question come up, and again, we will answer those on a Google Doc to make sure nobody gets theirs lost or left behind. The fourth and final thing we want to talk about is the value story getting lost in the crowd. At some point, your salespeople still have, their lips have to move. Remember, and now it's a precious moment. It's like, now a miracle has to happen because all this build up, and now they don't even get like another chance always. So they can't suck at this moment. And so the thing I want to talk about is the work we're doing in this area of science-backed presentations, and specifically built for remote or virtual settings like this. The idea that remote settings, is that there are very specific things to know about what happens in a remote virtual presentation that we've done a ton of science around. For example, people forget 90% of what you say pretty much right after you say it. They will take away, and I'm aware you will probably remember 10% of what you heard today. Hopefully it's something that is precise and you can do something with. But what needs to happen is you can't force people to remember 15% because the cognitive workload will cause them to remember 3. So the point is, you don't have to over-engineer this to a point. You have to know your 10%. You have to know what 10% you want them to remember, and then you need to control that 10% throughout the presentation and keep their focus on it and keep reiterating it. And then you need to repeat. We have done research, and I'm going to give you an ebook at the end here that shows you how much repetition you need for certain lengths of presentations to get your 10% to precision memory. Again, the goal being precision memory. And so one of the things is that at the end of the day, 80% is not 100%. Sales still needs to get involved, but it's in a digital environment. Sales tells 83.4% of salespeople say the main thing they do in this environment is use a deck. The problem is they're using the same decks they used to use when they stood in front of the customer and they could provide the animation, the motion, and all the control. Now, as a postage stamp, the deck has to take control. So things like animation, annotation, 10% message repeated throughout. There's a lot of things to learn. And again, we're going to give you an ebook at the end called Memorable Marketing with some of our most recent research in here about how to embed yourself in memory, how to spike emotion and create motivation from your presentations. But there's actually science to this. It doesn't need to be guesswork. There are specific things you should and shouldn't do. So that's something I wanted to offer, that your remote, virtual, digital presentations need to be different than in-person presentations by a mile. And so you need to think about that as part of how are you going to stand out now when everything looks the same on Zoom. Ardath, you have an idea to share with the crowd too.
I do. And this is what Modus calls microlearning or just-in-time learning. And what we're finding out is that people prefer the bite-sized chunks, right? A little bit at a time, just when they need it, something that they can learn in the flow of their work rather than being pulled into, a 2-day huge training or something where they're probably going to remember 10% or whatever it is. That this thing about it is just-in-time learning can be used for a lot of things. It can be used to reinforce those big trainings, right? So there's retention. It also helps when your sales rep or whoever gets a reminder just at the time they need to use something, then they use it, then they're getting extra reinforcement so they can use it again. They're actually learning it. And so this microlearning is meant to be, it can be used on a mobile device, a tablet, on your desktop, whatever, but think like 2 or 3 minute video training, and then you could have a quiz that reinforces that information. There's a leaderboard you can use to get that competitive spirit going so people can see how well they're doing. You get analytics on who's completed what and what they've scored, those kinds of things. They're easy to create and simple, but it's how you can update on buyer messaging, for example, when everything changed at COVID. How'd your personas change? Update everybody. New messaging, update everybody. And you can push alerts out, right? So people know, oh, there's something new I need to know. So think about product updates, new product introductions, all those kinds of things. But this short learning is really key. And what research is showing is 65% better retention with video used in training in these bite-sized chunks. So that should answer the question that we had earlier a little bit. And 58% of your sales reps, for example, want video training, micro-learning in the flow of work, and not just all millennials either. We tend to think, oh, well, that's the young kids want it. The older people don't want it. Well, Modus's primary industry is manufacturers. That's who our primary customers are, and a lot of the reps are older, and they take to this like water, so like ducks to water. So it's not an age thing, it's a like thing.
Awesome. Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly that honestly, I always talk about humans are, I call them deficit learners. They aren't prepared to learn until they find themselves in a deficit. And what happens is when you're a seller, you're in a certain selling situation and you're in the flow of your work. Okay, I've got this call coming up about this product line at this stage of the buying cycle. Ding! I need something related to that. And I want it quick and I want it fast. So to the audience, when you think of digital engagement, we talked about 80% is self-serve. There's still moments where the sellers have to shine. And they're going to need to shine in that moment and being prepped for that moment when it happens, as opposed to, yeah, we launched that product and training 6 months ago. They should have pledged allegiance and committed their lives to it, right? But that's not the way they work. So having digital tools for the seller, not just the self-service environment, is what we're talking about today. So I've taken us right up to the top of the hour. Ardath, thank you for that. Messages lack appropriate context. We talked about acquisition versus expansion. Interactive experiences. We talked about interactive ebooks and that whole online experience, the cool trade show like thing. Purposeful engagement. Heard about the customer portal and how interactive that is. And what else? Remind me, Ardath, what was the other
ROI
one?
Calculator.
Yeah, the calculators or the assessments, the interactive tools. And then standout delivery, we talked about virtual ready PowerPoint for the digital environment and this idea of micro learning so that they, again, stand out. Their delivery stands out because they get smart and are better in that moment. So a bunch of ideas that came at you over the time here. We took your questions as best we could along the way. Ardath and I have a free ebook, each of us, that goes deeper into some of these ideas that we were able to just touch on here today. So if you go to this link, you will get both of these. So take a look at this link, copy it down. If you don't have time and you got to run, we'll put this link in the follow-up email. So thank you, everybody who was here today. It was an outstanding turnout, and you had some really good questions, and we would promise to answer them. And Ardath, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. It goes too fast, but really was a good time. All right, digital engagement, you own it. Salespeople haven't gone away yet. So I know as marketers, we all thought maybe that would be the case and we would rule the world. But digital engagement, you own more of that buyer's journey, and you need to make sure that that integration with sales you own as well. All right, guys, everybody take care. Good selling. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.